Nearly half of people who identify as strong Republicans say it may be necessary to take up arms against their own government. Where does that come from?
That's the focus of tonight's angle.
I want to start with you because the most alarming number in that it may be necessary to take up arms, the entire number is alarming. 28% of Americans overall, but 45% of people who identify as strong Republicans. Look at this. Nearly 3 in 10 Americans overall agree it may be necessary at some point soon for citizens to take up arms against the government.
These are stunning results. I mean, they really are. When Joe and I embarked on this, and we put together the questionnaire, we knew the mood of the country was not positive, but it is so much worse than we thought it was. And so you look at that question on taking up arms against the government, it's 45% of strong Republicans, but John, it's 33% of NPR listeners, 26% of very liberals, 37% of those with guns in their households. It really demonstrates the extraordinary polarization in the country right now, and there's a pandemic of mistrust between Americans and their government and their media.
That's the focus of tonight's angle.
And so, Joel, I was reading this and thinking about disaffection we saw going back to the Perot campaign in 1992, where people thought the government didn't get them, didn't understand globalization. These findings seem to tell me people think the government is out to get them, doesn't just understand them, but is somehow after them. The government is corrupt and rigged against people like me. 66% of Republicans agree with that, 46% of Democrats. I generally trust our elections to be conducted fairly and accurately counted. 56% of Americans agree with that, but 4 in 10 Americans overall disagree with that. And you see among Republicans, 62%, 41% of independents. Disaffection, disillusionment, what's the word for it, and how do you fix it?
Well, look, I think it has to do with partisanship in the media they consume. If you look beyond some of those top-line numbers and consider the fact that, since the year 2000, Republicans have held the White House for 12 years, with Bush 8 years, Trump 4 years, Democrats so far only 10 since the beginning of this century. What are they watching and hearing that make them think that elections aren't free and fair?
That's the focus of tonight's angle.
We've had Republicans control the Senate a significant number of times since 2000, and they are winning elections. So I really don't understand how this can be anything other than misinformation and disinformation coming from the media that they consume most assiduously, which tends to be Fox News and some other websites that tilt very strongly to appeal to conservative voters.
That's the focus of tonight's angle.
And when you look at ideology on the people who say government is rigged against them, it's not only highest among conservatives, 66%, but when you look inside the data a bit, you're going to see it's very high among white men. The group that most sociologists and analysts would say are the people who benefit the most at society. But for some reason, white male conservatives feel very aggrieved.
Well,
that's the focus of tonight's angle.
Right. So this is the way we resolve these things. You have 2 guys on TV who know what they're doing, politely talking about it. This is the way it should be done. But that's not what's happening. That's not what you're seeing in the country, which is part of the problem.
That's the focus of tonight's angle.
To Joel's point, what voters think the people who create news content are trying to do. Essentially, what am I thinking when I come to work every day?
That's the focus of tonight's angle.
37% of Americans think we are here to present facts, but 48%, that's half. That's nearly half of Americans think that most people creating news content are trying to get their own views across. To Joel's point, what voters think the people who create news content are trying to do. Essentially, what am I thinking when I come to work every day? 37% of Americans think we are here to present facts, but 48%, that's half. That's nearly half of Americans think that most people creating news content are trying to get their own views across. And then again, as people gather for 4th of July parades and barbecues over this weekend, what voters believe is the root of disagreement on political issues. 35% say, oh, that's an honest disagreement. We just disagree. Should taxes be higher or lower? Where should regulations be? But 50% believe, Neil, it's from misinformation. How do we get people out of their silos to listen to the other side?
That's the focus of tonight's angle.
Yeah. Hey, John. Joe and I can help explain what's going on, but the prescriptive aspects of this are beyond our abilities.
That's the focus of tonight's angle.
This is sobering. It's very tough data. And truthfully, I think it may have to get worse before it gets better. And I mean, you read through this data, Democrats don't trust Republicans. Republicans don't trust Democrats. Democrats think Republicans are getting disinformation. Republicans think the same thing about Democrats.
That's the focus of tonight's angle.
There's no middle ground here whatsoever.
Well, the one.
I mean, quoting Liz Cheney from the previous section, men are running the world, not going that well, and it's not going that well.
Joel, you get a final
Yeah, the one
word.
thing I would add, and as a former journalist myself, we have a fractionalized media environment where people can find and seek out media outlets, major ones, that they agree with.
That's the focus of tonight's angle.
We're not having common conversations. We don't have three network anchors who are extremely respected. People are listening, reading, consuming news, whether it's on radio, television, the internet, that they agree with. And you have to know that there is an increasing number of people, a large number of people who are now getting their news from the internet. And they will say sites like Facebook, Instagram, those have become sources of news, which are social media. It is not filtered. It is not fact checked. So we're in a very treacherous area here for democracy, I think. And with a cherished First Amendment, which we have to be mindful and respectful of, I think we have to also think from the media side, how can we do a better job to not partisan-ize the news as much as we have been?
I'm a conservative Republican, and I believe deeply in the policies of limited government. I will never put party above my duty to the Constitution. I swore an oath under God, and I will abide by that oath. Those of us who believe in Republican principles and ideals have a responsibility to try to lead the party back to what it can be. Our nation is preserved by those who abide by their oaths to our Constitution.
I think we have to also think from the media side, how can we do a better job to not partisan-ize the news as much as we have been?
We have a lot to get to, so we're going to dive right in.
4th of July is supposed to be an all-American and all-Americans celebration. But some new polling we'll share with you right now offers some fascinating and, yes, some troubling insights.
People are listening, reading, consuming news, whether it's on radio, television, the internet, that they agree with.
Voters think the people who create news content are trying to do. Essentially, what am I thinking when I come to work every day?
That's the focus of tonight's angle.
37% of Americans think we are here to present facts, but 48%, that's half, that's nearly half of Americans, think that most people creating news content.
Now, all high and mighty spent basically the last year
Trying to get their own views across.
Claiming to be the supreme defender of the Constitution.
It is across the board, they're feeling like this.
If he believes that that White House counsel can be dragged before a partisan congressional committee that is hell-bent on doing whatever it can to keep its base happy and torture the president.
It's too easy to kind of pin this on Republicans versus Democrats.
How on earth is any president supposed to have candid conversations with his White House counsel, frankly, about anything?
Amen. I agree with that last point. We need to listen and we need to be careful.
Now, think about it this way.
At the same point in time, 51% of very liberals feel the same way.
And by the way, she's an unrepentant liar.
Right, so this is the way we resolve these things. You have two guys on TV who know what they're doing, politely talking about it. This is the way it should be done.
Isn't just a wrecking ball to the Constitution?
But that's not what's happening. That's not what you're seeing in the country.
And she repeatedly lies about what the America First movement is all about.
Which is part of the problem.
The reality that we face today as Republicans, as we think about the choice in front of us.
In fact, we are the ones trying to save the Constitution.
Which is part of the problem.
We have to choose, because Republicans cannot both be loyal to Donald Trump and loyal to the Constitution.
Which is part of the problem.
She isn't just smearing Trump, by the way. She's smearing the entire country that voted for Trump. Oh, really? Like, who gave you the authority to say that? Like 74 million Americans voted for Trump.
We have a fractionalized media environment where people can find and seek out media outlets, major ones, that they agree with.
None of them count.
I would add, yeah, and as a former journalist myself,
He summoned a mob to Washington. He knew they were armed on January 6th. He knew they were angry. And he directed the violent mob to march on the Capitol.
and with a cherished First Amendment, which we have to be mindful and respectful of.
From you and your new pals who want to abolish, I don't know, just the Senate, eliminate the Electoral College, destroy the Supreme Court, force Americans to submit to global rules made by international bureaucrats. We know that virtually everyone in the American populist movement opposed the events of January 6th.
We're not having common conversations. We don't have three network anchors who are extremely respected.
Which is part of the problem.
She's also repeatedly lied about the events of January 6th. So by supporting Pelosi and the Democrats, Cheney encourages the radical anti-Americanism that tears down our statues, hurts our standard of living, undermines our military. They announced their opposition at the time, and they've repeatedly stated that Cheney has taken the side of Pelosi and the hard left against the Constitution. Repeatedly and consistently, I mean, the notion that hundreds of people wandering through the Capitol represented an attempt to subvert the U.S. government, and that was the plan, is just ludicrous.
The objection today is raised because there are irregularities across this country with regard to voting.
So we're in a very treacherous area here for democracy, I think.
Any lawbreakers from that day should be punished. But as for President Trump, trashes our culture, generally tells the rest of the world that America is and always has been evil.
Objection is in writing, signed by a number of members of the House of Representatives.
Just that. He certainly never indicated that he intended to overthrow the Constitution. Instead, he did dispute the vote count.
I have an objection because 10 of the 29 electoral votes cast by Florida were cast by electors not lawfully certified.
Just as Democrats did in 2000, 2004, and 2016. It was like K-Tel greatest hits there. Well, also, let's not forget that she's lies hurt America. Here in the United States, most Americans, and certainly the great majority of Republicans, know that she's just trying to get revenge for her loss of influence. But in the rest of the world, her smears and her lies will be used by our nation's anti-American propaganda inside the GOP. The GOP has moved on to discourage their enemies as their people from working with us. And let's not forget that Cheney is allied with the radical anti-Americans on the left right now. She wants Nancy Pelosi to remain as Speaker of the House. So at this point, you might wonder, why is she using her last few months of her career and turned against America while claiming she's the supreme defender of the Constitution? Why? I don't know. I think the answer is obvious.
Democrats think Republicans are getting disinformation. Republicans think the same thing about Democrats.
To pursue vengeance and spread lies. Well,
there's no middle ground here whatsoever.
That was committed to open borders, endless wars, shipping jobs to China, making sure that Roe versus Wade would never, ever be overturned. You just use that to get elected. So the
prescriptive aspects of this are beyond our abilities.
She belonged to a political movement.
Democrats don't trust Republicans. Republicans don't trust Democrats.
2015 and 2016, the Republican base effectively ended the Bush-Cheney movement.
And you read through this data, people.
Do you see yourself running for president as a way to prevent what you say would be the destruction of the party, ultimately damaging our country?
I haven't made a decision about that yet, and I'm obviously very focused on my reelection. I'm very focused on the January 6th committee. I'm very focused on my obligations to do the job that I have now.
Choosing new leadership that would actually try to help Americans instead of hurting them.
And I'll make a decision about 24 down the road.
They only care about holding on to that last shred of power in the old glory days. Bob Corker, Jeff Flake, they already left the Senate. Pat Toomey, he's going to be gone at the end of the year. George P. Bush is a nice guy, but he was annihilated in his primary.
There needs to be Republicans of courage. Liz Cheney is one of those Republicans.
Liz Cheney in particular is showing us that courage is contagious.
Congresswoman Liz Cheney offering some much needed truth during a time of so many dangerous lies.
But that power is slipping away from them. Democrats and wannabe Democrats like me, she's next. She's not going to go quietly. Completely delusional, totally separated from the way real people live their lives. I mean, this is why people think Washington can count on unlimited support from the regime media that longs for the day when Republicans merely pretended to disagree with the Clintons while essentially implementing virtually the same policies as the Democrats.
Hey, America. The Supreme Court has delivered massive victories for religious liberty, Second Amendment rights, and the pro-life movement. All the glory goes to God. The credit? Well, that goes to Donald J. Trump.
Liberals and never Trumpers, they are tired of her tedious games. Who, it seems to me, love Liz. So whatever she decides, though, she can. Do you think Liz Cheney is going to be supporting or campaigning for someone like Ron DeSantis or Mike Pompeo if they run for president? And let's say she doesn't run. So forget Trump for a minute. This is a great and beautiful state, and the people of this state deserve a representative who's more interested in advancing Wyoming's interests than Liz Cheney's own rabid crusade against the old GOP. Of course she won't be. Remember, her litmus test is, if you do not denounce Trump, you are a danger to America, and frankly, you need to be canceled. But they're not the voters here because she has a famous father. Liz Cheney is where she is. That is literally the only reason she won her House seat here in Wyoming in the first place. Wyoming. That comment. It's just a sign of growing desperation by a woman who understands that her political career, that's the angle, is essentially over. And next month, she's trying to stretch her 15 minutes of fame, is leading an attack on the presidency itself. But in reality, right now, regardless of how much damage she does to the White House, America is a representative democracy. It is not an aristocracy.
How do we get people out of their silos to listen to the other side?
To the principle of separation of powers, and of course to the Constitution. Calling White House counsel Pat Cipollone in for questioning via subpoena is going to see and feel democracy in action.
These are stunning results. I mean, they really are. When Joe and I embarked on this, and we put together the questionnaire, we knew the mood of the country was not positive.
After he had already talked to the committee voluntarily, by the way.
Joel and Neil, grateful for your time. We will continue this critically important conversation. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us on.
Thank you both. Two of the best in the business. You see them right there. Republican Neil Newhouse and Democrat Joel Benenson collaborated on this project. Well,
and this is sobering data.